fans, wherever you may be. Welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, Seahawks fans. Welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with Keith Myers. As usual, co-host Keith Myers. Welcome into the show. How you doing?
I'm doing well. It's, midweek, our midweek show after a win. It just makes for a nice, smooth week for us.
Yeah, we thought this year we're going to do 3 shows a week. We're going to do a recap and a preview, but in the middle, we're going to do our midweek show where we cover all things Seahawks football, everything from injury reports to talking a little bit more in depth about what we saw in the last game, maybe looking forward a little bit to a preview. We'll also have a little bit of a look around the NFL on some of our favorite games or some of the games we want to talk about and take away from the previous week. So all in all, it should be fun and a kind of a free-flowing conversation. So where do you want to get started this week?
Well, I just want to start with an announcement that got made today is that Uchenna Nwasu, the linebacker for the Seahawks, who had a fantastic week this week, including a forced fumble, a sack, and 7 other tackles, was named the NFC Defensive Player of the Week today. So
yeah, great honor. Yeah, that's great.
I mean, and it was one of many good performances by Seattle's defense.
Yeah, I agree. He totally deserved that award. In real time, I could tell he was having a fantastic game. He was probably the player that stood out to me the most on the defensive side of the ball that was having a great effect on the game itself. And good for him coming to a brand new team, establishing himself as one of the team leaders. And this certainly helps, going out there and showing what you got first game and kind of establishes himself going forward. So I love it. What else? Oh, Ken Walker practiced today. So it looks like he's coming back and be available for the game against the 49ers on Sunday. Who else was out there? I had my notes all good, and now I'm all discombobulated.
Well, while you're looking for those, there was initial reports that Jamal Adams was going to be out probably for the year, and now it's official. He is having surgery. It will end his year. And it's not like, oh, we think it's likely this. It's they have a full diagnosis. He's done.
So what was it exactly? Did he tear his quad away from the knee, or how does that work?
Because it wasn't like a patellar tendon, because that's what would have caused the quad to just like bunch up higher above the knee and that kind of stuff. But it was a different spot. It was and so it wasn't the tendon that was over the knee. It was the ligament that attaches it to other parts. And so it was, it's structural rather than mechanical. But yeah, he tore it completely off the bone, and it has to get reattached, which likely involves them drilling a hole in the bone so they can like pull it through and reattach it, and then let the bone heal around it. So it's going to be a long recovery. It's not a quick one.
I saw a picture of him getting carted off the field, and it was just a sad sight. I mean, what a deal. Unfortunate, you want a player to have an opportunity to prove his contract and to prove his worth and beyond the contract, just as a good person and a terrific player when healthy. And I wish him the best. I don't know what the future holds. You had mentioned yesterday some contract situations with him into the future. Got reminded by a fan on our YouTube account that he is almost fully guaranteed for 2023 as well. So his cap hits and so forth. I went out there and looked, are in fact brutal next year. So next year it would unless they come to some sort of an injury settlement, which is unlikely, I
No,
would
he has no
think that
reason.
he is
Yeah, he
fully
has
guaranteed on
no
injury
reason
too.
to give back money to Seattle. That's not a thing, unless he retires.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
2024 we can walk away. We're
mhm.
going to have a dead cap space of around $7 or $8 million, but we'd be able to save 13 million overall. So
So there is one more year on it. Okay,
there is
that's
one more year where
yep.
we're
I had that
underwater.
wrong. Well,
So, and unfortunate. Let's wish him well though. Tyler Ott is going to be out. I'm not exactly sure, but it looks like it's going to be season ending. He's going to have shoulder surgery, which is the worst possible injury for a long snapper, and he's being replaced on the roster by our practice squad elevated player, Tinker. And
mhm.
then we brought back safety Scott Nelson onto the practice squad after um, Tyler Ott moved over to injured reserve. They haven't done anything yet officially with Jamal Adams, but that move is coming
Yep.
soon. And then they brought back Tanner Muse officially onto the 53. So he's elevated and coming up as onto the permanent roster. So that's interesting. Wanted to mention too that Tariq Woolen suffered a stinger on that attempted tackle that we witnessed. He kind of went off the field with his arm hanging. Came back in later in the game. Not too many people noticed that, but he was in. Saw him on at least one play, and he looked fine. Don't know what the long-term prognosis is there with that. So that's kind of the comings and goings of the injury report and the roster early in the week, and we'll have more news as things get closer. Particularly with Damian Lewis. Damian Lewis is kind of in the same bucket as Ken Walker. It would be kind of a later in the week decision by the team whether or not he could go, and that still holds true for him. So, what else is going on, Keith? We were going to talk about players of the week. We were going to do both offense and defense. Um, you, I have mine for offense, and we talked about it briefly before. And mine's going to be Geno Smith.
Mhm.
It's hard for me to kind of, while there are other considerations, it's really hard to give it to anybody else considering the expectation level that was on Geno, and then he came through like he did, and basically kind of carried the team that first half, and really kind of made it possible for the Seahawks to win at all. And he just had a great game. You mentioned the efficiency right out
Mhm.
of the gate for him, the 13 for 13, 17 for 18 overall in the first half. Things quieted down for him in the second half, but he did enough, put that score on the board that lasted until the very end, 17-16. So, who do you have? And I had my honorable mention, but I'll let you state your
I have
take first.
rookie right tackle Abe Lucas as my offensive player of the game. Going back and rewatching, yeah, he had the one penalty, but other than that, he had a very tough task against Randy Gregory all night,
Yeah,
and it didn't matter. He just shut him down, shut him out, and I love that. And third round pick wasn't, you know, Cross was the guy who's supposed to start. He was the first round pick. Um, Lucas might be the better player,
which is
and
crazy. I
it
was
is
just thinking the
crazy.
same thing. I was just thinking that so far, that's not a wild, crazy statement. I mean, that's accurate. He's been the
Yeah,
better player so far in camp. He's been more
they've both
accurate
been
as far as
good.
his blocking assignments, his grades, his
They've both
ability.
been good. I don't take stuff away from Charles Cross. Yeah, he's made a couple mistakes, but
I think one of
he's
the most
also a rookie.
surprising things is the run blocking, Keith.
Yeah, that's the part that surprised everybody because he didn't run block in college. He just didn't. He didn't need to. That not with the offense that he played in, and so we knew he could pass block. We knew his feet were elite. We didn't know if he understood leverage and hand placement and all the angles and stuff that are necessary to be a good run blocker. And he makes a mistake in there here and there, but his motor just kind of makes up for it. He just grinds people into the ground, and it's
And gets to the second level.
fantastic.
Yeah,
Oh yeah, absolutely. He uses that athleticism that makes him a great pass blocker, to get upfield and hit linebackers and make sure those holes are there for his running backs. And like I said, I love it. I'm just absolutely pleased with him and his progress so far.
absolutely. Yeah, there's no question. He was my honorable mention guy on
Yeah,
the
and
offensive side of the ball.
my honorable mention, I had two. I had Gino and DK, and I thought, oh, dude, do I really put DK Metcalf in there after that fumble? But you go back and look at it. He's fighting for yards. He's trying to get stuff, and not only that, but he's having the ball torn away. He couldn't get a second hand on it because of the first guy on him, and the second guy comes through and gets that after the ball. It's hard. That's
I
tough.
didn't in real
So
time in the game. I didn't even blink twice at that fumble. I was just like, yeah, shit happens. Sorry for
yep.
the French there, but it happens. It just that's football. They're fighting. He's fighting.
Hmm.
I liked it. The encouraging thing, I will say this about the way that DK Metcalf was used and the fact that Geno Smith, in a way that got the ball in there on contested catches quite often. So rather than wait for DK Metcalf to be wide open, he was throwing the ball in there. We didn't see a lot of that from Russell Wilson and the
No,
DK
never.
Metcalf combo. And it's encouraging to see that, especially without anything really being close to being an interception or anything from Geno. He was just getting it in there with confidence and
Yeah.
quickly without hesitation. And that to me is a really promising sign.
He got it into a couple. There was a couple that were really small windows to get it to DK, and he did. And perhaps more impressive was DK catching the ball with guy just draped over him, and just having really sure hands. I mean, over the first couple of years of his career, he's dropped some balls, and his hands haven't been um, elite, if you want to call it that. But that was not the case on Monday. He was very sure-handed, got, anything that hit him in the hands, he caught, even with players draped all over him. So that's why he was an honorable mention for me, despite the fumble.
So let's turn our attention to the defensive side of the ball. You'd already mentioned the idea that Uchenna Nuwasu was NFC Defensive Player of the Week, and I agree with that wholeheartedly. I mean, I
Hmm.
kind of called it out in the middle of the game. I was like, man, Uchenna Nuwasu is having a heck of a game.
He really
Um,
was.
and so he's definitely my player of the week on defense. With the sack, that chase down sack that showed his sideline to sideline speed, caught up with Russell Wilson behind the line of scrimmage and forced him out of bounds. You mentioned the hurries, the forced fumble. He was just all over the place making tackles. Quite impressive for the first game in a new scheme with new coaches on a new team.
Yeah, but I couldn't put it any better. I mean, he had a fantastic game. Was essential for this win. Without him in there, without some of the stuff that he did, Seahawks don't win that game. So I don't have any problem with that one. He wasn't my pick though, and he wasn't my pick entirely because I knew that he was going to be your pick. And so my pick actually is Mike Jackson.
Yeah,
Um,
easy pick.
he's like the number 5 cornerback on this roster. He's like down the depth chart guy who just came in, started because of injuries and other reasons, and just was solid, was good. I mean, the Russell Wilson had some completions and did some things, but it was never that Mike Jackson was out of position or just completely failed to make a play on the ball or any of that. He did his job really well, and he's a
And
guy with
physical.
size. Yeah, he's a guy with size, physicality, length. Him playing that well is absolutely repeatable. And for the guy that's 5th on the depth chart at cornerback to be that good, that says a lot.
Yeah. Russell Wilson threw for a lot of yards. I think he threw for 360 yards, but it wasn't as efficient as
Mm-mm.
it could have been. And it came in fits and starts and a couple of long plays, in critical moments. But I thought overall the secondary played really well. My honorable mention was actually Quandre Diggs. Had his
Mhm.
hand in there on a forced fumble, had that stop at the goal line right before that. Just played in a way um, that allowed the cornerbacks to play with confidence when they know you've got him behind you, and you're just able to kind of leave those guys out there. I mean, when you think about Tariq Woolen, how many times we saw him just on the one-on-one matchups on the outside with Quandre Diggs clear on the other side of the field. I was impressed. I was impressed with the scheme. We haven't even really talked about the scheme very much, Keith, on the defensive
Nope.
side, but man, I'm kind of excited about the way that the scheme rolled out. Now, granted, and we'll talk about this in another segment, what we'd like to see improved. But other than maybe the defending the run and the edge play on this defense, I thought overall it was a great performance.
Yeah, it was a great performance. And I mean, you give up 16 points to Russell Wilson and that offense with those receivers and those running backs and that offensive line. And the truth is, like, they they made Russell Wilson's life tough. They were in his face. They moved him around. They chased him out of the pocket. They got sacks. They
Quite a
forced
few
off
hurries
balance
too.
throws. Yeah, they forced a bunch of off balance throws. Um, Overall, I mean, the defense played really well, and the secondary was a big part of that. Yeah, Wilson had a lot of yards, but you know, if you're watching the game on TV, you kept seeing the stats as the game rolled on, where he had, you know, one completion to a wide receiver. It was like his first nine
Right.
completions were to backs and tight ends. Um, you know, and then he had the big completion to Jerry Judy when Kobe Bryant was in fantastic position. It was good coverage. Sometimes a good throw and a good catch beats good coverage. But before that, like nothing was down the field. Everything was short. Everything was to a running back or a tight end. Um, and that just shows you that Tariq Woolen and Mike Jackson were playing outstanding on the outside.
And Sidney Jones came in and had a great game as well.
Yeah.
And then you can a lot of detractors will say, well, they were, 1 yard away from scoring twice. It would have been 14 points. It wouldn't even have been, it would have been a completely different game. Yeah, that's true. But you can also say that without Seattle punching the ball out and causing those fumbles, regardless of where they were on the field, changed the dynamic of the game as well. And you can't take anything away, just like you mentioned yesterday on the other show, Keith. You can't take anything away from the defense in this performance because they rose up when it mattered most to prevent
Yeah.
them from scoring.
Now, I don't think expecting, you know, those fumbles and fumble recoveries to be repeated every week is a reliable path to winning. Um, but don't take the achievement away from the defense. This wasn't like, you know, where a player just dropped the ball and that was a fumble. No, they went and knocked it out. And they part of the reason they were able to knock it out was because they had the run stuffed short, and then they could go after the ball once that happened because they knew they weren't going to get into the end zone. Part of the reason they got that was because Quandre Diggs came up and made that fantastic play to keep the the tight end out of the end zone by like 6 inches in what looked like a touchdown. I thought it was a touchdown. I was very happy that it'd be wrong. And that, Diggs just made a fantastic play there. Those kind of plays, you think, oh, well, it's only 6 inches. They're going to get in anyway. Guess what? They didn't.
Yeah.
They ran the ball.
And against a
They fumbled
much
it.
bigger tight end
Yeah.
in Alberto. I mean, that guy's a beast.
Yeah.
So next segment, what do we like and what needs work? I'll go first. I liked the fact that we had quarterback pressures and sacks in this game. My expectations were unknown. We just didn't know. We had a lot of young guys, some new guys on the team in Quentin Jefferson and Nuasu, and just a whole bunch um, of players that we didn't have a chance to really see in preseason. So this was just kind of up in the air for me against a fairly decent offensive line from Denver and a mobile quarterback in Russell Wilson. We all know about that, but we got there. Quentin Jefferson had 5 pressures. Barton and Nuasu both had sacks. Darrell Taylor looked good moving towards the quarterback with 3 pressures. One of the things that's in my what needs work is Daryl Taylor moving backwards because he looked bad in coverage and setting the edge
Yep.
against the run. He had
We'll
a
get
run
there.
stopping grade at 45, but that's what I wanted to start with.
No, and I think that's fair. Yeah, Seahawks have struggled to get pressure regularly on the quarterback the last couple of years. And now they've switched defenses in terms of scheme. They've got some guys in there. They're getting after the quarterback, and they're being more aggressive to do so. Noasu getting a sack, and then Cody Barton getting a sack. And actually, when you're saying like, this is the positive, like what are we looking forward to, and what went well? Honestly, Cody Barton and Jordan Brooks in the middle went well. I mean, they combined for 22 tackles, first and second on the team. We knew Jordan Brooks was going to be good. I mean, he has the franchise record in tackles. He broke Bobby Wagner's record last year. We knew he was going to be good and get the job done, but there was a lot of question marks about Cody Barton, and I hope he answered them because he had a monster game. He really did. He was all over the field. You saw him in on a lot of plays and a lot of tackles, and his ability to get upfield, get off a block, and just smother Wilson on that sack was fun. And yeah, I'm pleased that this was an unknown. This was a question mark. And at least in that game, it was very much a positive.
Yeah. I've got a couple more. The play of Tariq Woolen, I just thought was just outstanding. Didn't allow a reception on 3 attempts. We talked about that possibly, just being a matter of semantics there with him. But nonetheless, defended Cortland Sutton for the entire game, essentially, and basically shut him down. I mean, he had a couple of pass interference calls that were legitimate. And you hope that you can learn from that and correct those things. But there wasn't anything that I saw that gave me pause to say that he couldn't handle the job in the NFL.
Yeah. So my expectation when I found out that he was going to start is, as with a lot of things with this year's Seahawks teams, I'm like, okay, let's keep my expectations down, because I go back to Brandon Browner, and he looked terrible for the first few weeks when he became a starter in Seattle back in 2012. And then it clicked, and he started to play really well. And I'm like, Woolen has that size. He has that Brandon Browner size. He's got more speed than Browner ever had. But he plays with that size. He plays with physicality, and all of that. And I'm like, just wait, just give him time. And you know what? He didn't need it.
And the team didn't think so either, because they put him out there.
They put him out there, and they put him on an island so many times in this game against a really, really good and underrated receiver. And it didn't matter. He just stepped up to the challenge, and I could not have been more impressed. Yeah, a couple of pass interference penalties. We'd like to see that go away. At the same time,
you like to see the aggressiveness too.
One, rookie, he's going to make mistakes. Like, let's be patient. And two, yeah, these weren't like he was out of position and tackled a guy because he got beat. This was him being aggressive and trying to make a play. And okay, maybe got a little too aggressive. I don't care. Like, those are penalties. I can take those penalties.
Yeah, he let somebody get a little behind him in the end zone once, but other than that, I didn't really see too many mistakes at all. The other one that I wanted to mention is just the efficiency of Geno Smith and the offense coming out from the very first snap on the offense. There were question marks as to whether Geno would be a good fit running the offense. There would be question marks as far as what our offensive coordinator was going to be able to do. And you just didn't see a lot of players play together again in preseason, just like on the defensive side of the ball. And so when they came out and they had the 13 straight completions and things were just flowing, and he was getting the ball to like 7 or 8 different targets during that span, I was thrilled, because that was the best case scenario for me. It didn't matter at that point for me whether we won or lost. The score as most scores, I think this season will be secondary for me, as opposed to trying to figure out the development of the offense, of individual players and so forth. And maybe Gino is a guy that can hold this thing down a little bit. I don't know that answer yet, but in this first game, he showed that it's possible. And
Mhm.
so you just have to continue then to see that evolve week in, week out, get better. Don't take steps back. Go out and take it to defenses that you're not necessarily supposed to be better than, but you go ahead and you make things happen anyway. We've got a decent running game that showed. Rashad Penny had 5 yards per carry in this game. Would like to have seen him have a few more touches than just 12. But overall, I was really happy with the efficiency of the offense.
Yeah, but I think a lot of that was because um, Denver's play calling was expecting Seattle to run the ball more. They came out defensively with the idea that they wanted to shut down Rashad Penny in the running game because they didn't believe Geno Smith can beat him. And so they came out and they stacked the box and they had extra guys in there and they did all those things. And Geno did the right thing. You saw him at the line, changing plays, changing protections, doing what he had to do, and not being afraid to throw the ball more, even though that's not necessarily, I think, what Seattle wanted. Um, but it's what the defense gave him. And that's the part that if you take what the defense gives you a lot, you're gonna be okay. And he took what the defense gave him time and time again.
And
Sometimes they gave him a lot. So
that seems to go back to a statement I heard Shane Waldron make. I think it was even before last season when they were talking about bringing this offense in, what it was designed to do, and that was it. They were wanting to basically run uh, the entire playbook out of 2 or 3 different formations and make those calls at the line of scrimmage. And often with Wilson, we just didn't see that. And I think,
mhm.
reining it back in, playing within the offense, taking what the defense is giving you is the whole point of this offense, really. And having Gino out there doing that, I think, is encouraging.
Well,
Um,
when you've got Russell Wilson, like dictating all of those things to that degree is taking away what makes him great.
I agree.
His
There's no question,
improvisation,
Keith.
his
I agree.
ability to extend plays, and those beautiful deep balls that Russell Wilson throws happen when you let Russ be Russ. And there's no reason to let Geno be Geno. He isn't a good enough player to deal with that. So you ask Geno Smith to run the offense as it's created and not improvise.
So
Um, and that's what he did. He did it really well. And Shane Waldron called a great game.
Okay, so that's my larger question to you is, we had touched upon this just briefly in our last show about the coaching being
Mhm.
coming out and being important in this game. How about that as being something we like to see?
Oh, absolutely. I thought Shane Waldron had a great game plan. He knew how to attack this defense, given his skill players, and he did just that. And it worked really well. And defensively, like they gave up a lot of yards on defense. Like if you're an absolute pessimist, as I've been accused of being, it's easy to look at this defensive performance and say, yeah, they only gave up 16 points. But Denver should have had way more than that because they gave up so many yards when you're not going to get those turnovers at the goal line very often. It's easy to look and do that, but it wasn't what I saw. It wasn't the scheme. It wasn't the play calling. It wasn't the coaching that led to all those plays. It was breakdowns in execution. Um, it was Sidney Jones not carrying a route through his zone on his first play that led to a big play. It was, a couple of pass interference penalties by Woolen, and also Woolen not carrying a player through his zone on a play. It was Daryl Taylor's inability to set an edge reliably, and um, just there were things like that. That's why the defense struggled in terms of the total yards put up. Not the scheme, not the coaching, not the play calls. I mean, there were a couple of like you dial up a blitz, the same play when Denver has that screen set up, and you're just like, oh, that was the
man,
perfect call
that
against
was
Seattle's
tough.
defense.
That was tough.
But you know what? When you play aggressive, you take the risk of that. And they played aggressive, and I'm okay with that too. So,
that transitions us into what needs work.
mhm.
You mentioned a few things there. What else stood out to you, maybe on the offensive side, that could use a little bit more?
I would like to see the play calling get them a little more runs. And I know that I think they called a lot more runs than there were, and it was changed at the line correctly by Gino. But Rashad Penny was running well. He had 5 yards a carry, and that's not even including his best run of the night, which got called back.
True.
Get him the ball, get him more touches. And now that Ken Walker's back, get him some touches. Like, you got to find a way to get these guys the ball.
What do you expect to see against a team like San Francisco if we dial up the run a little bit more? You think that's the right thing to do
I
against
think it
that
is.
opponent?
I think it is, because I think they want to attack, especially attacking a player like Geno Smith. And if you are running the ball and you're getting them to read the run first and then realize it's a pass and get upfield, it makes it harder for them. And I think they need to be able to run the ball well in this game, and I expect them to. And so, yeah, as far as what needs work, I'd like to see that. I'd like to see someone other than Metcalf and Lockett at the wide receiver position show that they can get open.
I think Goodwin had 2 targets, 2 catches, but they were for minimal yards.
Yeah. And part of it is he hasn't practiced in a month. This was like really his first work. So
Yeah.
I'm hoping that improves and he gets out there and does more. And it would be nice if they did more in the second half. They didn't really do anything in the second half offensively. All of their success was in the first half. It happened to be enough. It looked really good.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I would say it needs work, and this is nitpicky because you'd mentioned the continued success or adjustments for the offense in the second half. That's certainly there. Austin Blythe run blocking, I thought, was not good, as well as getting blown up on Geno Smith's quarterback sneak attempt. But he had a 100% win rate when he was pass blocking. Phil Haynes allowed 3 quarterback pressures and had holding and false start penalties. So I'd like to see that improve a little bit. Cross allowed those 2 sacks when he got worn down towards, in the fourth quarter. Other than that, I thought the offensive line looked good. Offense in general, I thought was okay. And then on the defensive side, we've already talked about it, setting the edge and kind of tackling better. I think is something that you want to work on. And of course, Pete Carroll absolutely will want to work on those things this week. All right, so let's move forward and get to our segment as we look around the NFL really quick. I was at a game this weekend, the Kansas City Arizona game. Had an opportunity to go. I was kind of thrilled actually at the outcome in that game. Kansas City took it to Arizona. Mahomes looked fantastic. He looked mid-season form, 5 touchdowns, 375 yards or whatever it was, and he just looked unstoppable. Like the Arizona defense could not do anything to stop him, which does not bode well for Arizona, because I thought Arizona looked awful.
They looked bad. Arizona's defense looked especially bad because they could not get pressure on Mahomes. They don't have Chandler Jones, and it showed. They just didn't have a reliable pass rush, and the rest of the
no pressures.
Yeah, the rest of the defense just got picked apart because the front four, even when they blitzed, they couldn't get home. They couldn't get there. Part of that's Kansas City being a good offensive football team, but part of it's also they just don't have the guys. And it's pretty clear that Chandler Jones loss is going to be, huge.
And Hopkins on the other side. It's just something that Kyler Murray just doesn't have the weapons that he needs. Rondale Moore's out as well, and so it's just
his top 2 weapons from last year are both not there.
Yeah.
Right. Hopkins is suspended and Christian Kirk is in Jacksonville. They lost both of them. That's hard to recover from.
Yeah, I agree. So you had brought up 3 games that you kinda wanted to talk about. You kinda tossed them out, after we recorded the other day, and so why don't we get started with those?
Well, I wanted to talk about the Atlanta game because Marcus Mariota and Geno Smith are kind of the two guys that are reclamation projects as far as starting quarterbacks go. They're both guys that had their opportunity to start, failed at that, have been backups, and are now getting a chance to start again. And Marcus Mariota for 3 quarters looked outstanding and
So
had them in
tell
position to win.
everybody who the Falcons were playing.
Um,
The New Orleans Saints.
Tennessee. Or no, it's New Orleans. Sorry, I'm
Yeah,
thinking of the wrong game.
no problem.
The New Orleans Saints, which are a
Yeah.
good team. They are a team. I think I picked them as the winner of that division.
Yes, you did.
Over Tampa.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and they for 3 quarters, Mariota did everything they needed to, and then in the fourth quarter, it's like the lights became too bright. He had a fumble,
yeah,
made some mistakes, he
yeah,
struggled, and he let the Saints get back into it. He, you just gave Jameis Winston and New Orleans too many
yeah.
chances, and eventually they scored, and and Atlanta ended up losing by 1.
Yeah, Atlanta went into a prevent defense. Jameis Winston only had 60 yards passing through the first 3 quarters, Keith, but had 200 yards in the fourth quarter alone, 7 plays over 15 yards.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it was astounding to watch. I mean, t and I was pleased with Mariota early, and their offense and their defense looked good, really. They were hanging right with the Saints, and then all of a sudden, it just like a switch, and the Saints just poured it on. The Falcons couldn't do anything at all to get in their way, and the Saints just took that game in the fourth quarter, um, and that was the end,
Yeah.
27-26.
And it, in a sense, you look at them because one of the things is I thought the parallel between Geno Smith and Marcus Mariota was interesting, and also
I do. I agree.
they also like Geno Smith had a fantastic first half, and
Yes.
then the offense sputtered and didn't do
Yeah,
anything in the
I
second
I
half.
recognize very much the similarities in the Seahawks and the Falcons and the way maybe this season could play out over time because I think Seattle's going to be in games like this where
Mm-hmm.
they're up early or they're hanging around and all of a sudden it's just the other team kind of pours it on and that's it. But good game. I enjoyed it. After you said that we were going to look these things over, I sat and watched that game and that was crazy.
Yeah,
All right.
so that was one, and then I also was looking at a couple of the teams that I think need a quarterback, and that I also expect them to be down near the bottom of the league, thus at the top of the draft. And the New York Giants came out and got a win, 21-20 over Tennessee, which they were a playoff team, they were a division champion, they're expected to make another deep run. Um, Daniel Jones went 17 of 21. Granted, only
Yeah,
188 yards,
yeah, but he did what
but
he
it
had
was
to do.
enough. He did what he had to do.
Barkley had 164 yards rushing and looked
Yeah, he averaged
fantastic.
9.1 yards per carry.
Yeah, plus they had 3 other rushers that picked up an additional 75 yards. So the Giants won that game by rushing. They still punted like 5 or 6 times, but
Hmm.
Daniel Jones did just enough. He got the ball out. He looked tough. He got the ball into some tight spaces. On the other side of the ball, though, Tennessee, Tannehill just looked like Tannehill, and I don't know. They had a Tennessee had a muff punt return that gave the Giants a short field with 2 minutes to go, and then they scored that 2-point conversion, and the Giants pulled that out. Tennessee was probably going to end up winning that game without that.
Hmm.
So, I'm not going to take too much away from the Titans there. Derrick Henry looked okay, but was held to under 100 yards. But I felt like the Giants may have found a little something with Daniel Jones. I mean, not having those mistakes, the efficiency on the passing game, and then Barkley. They're going to win a few games this year. Maybe they hang with Daniel Jones through
Yeah,
this offseason.
I mean they clearly have a more competent coach, and it showed. And they got a lot out of Daniel Jones. Like I said, it was only 188 yards. Um, but it was 17 of 21. Like the efficiency of that meant that they moved the chains. They kept control of the ball. They did what they needed to do as far as that stuff. They gave themselves a chance to win, and they made plays when they had to. They may want to run with Daniel Jones. They may not, but ultimately, if they play that prepared regularly, they're going to win enough games to make Daniel Jones their most attractive option, because they're not going to be in position to draft high enough to get a top quarterback.
And I think if they do draft Keith, they're going to want to draft the tackle, because
They need it.
they allow 5 sacks here. I don't think it's going to get any better. Tennessee's not a world beater on their defensive front. They're not bad, but that does not bode well, long term for the Giants. They need to be able to solve that, and you can solve that if you have a top 10 pick. So I would look for something like that, especially if they feel comfortable with Jones moving forward, if they had the protection.
Yeah. And another team that I wanted I will be watching pretty closely this year will be Houston, because they appear to be, on paper, they're not a good football team, and you expect them to be one of those teams that loses a lot of games and be in position to draft a quarterback. But Davis Mills, 23 of 37, 240 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks. And it was enough. It led them to that 2020 tie against New Orleans.
And they had the lead 20-3 and heading into the fourth quarter.
They did. And they kind of gave that up, but
they did.
Which, is unfortunate for them, but I think they'll take the tie. If going into this game, they weren't expected to win this game. They were huge underdogs.
Well, and Colts with Matt Ryan now, we're expected to contend for that division.
Yeah.
With Tennessee. So we'll see.
Matt Ryan, 32 of 50, that's 64% completion percentage. I can do that math. 352 yards. Like, he played pretty well. Jonathan Taylor, 31 rushes for 161 yards.
Yeah.
And a touchdown, 5.2. Like, those are, you look at those numbers and you're thinking, the Colts probably ran up the score.
Yeah.
But they didn't. Yeah. It was the Texans that had the big lead going into the fourth quarter. And maybe that team is better than
Houston.
We're thinking.
Houston only had 78 yards rushing. They punted the ball 7 times. It's just it's crazy. That one interception Matt Ryan had was costly. But it was funny, because really Indianapolis didn't come alive until it was too late. I mean, they ended up tying the score, but that's not what they wanted to do. They're clearly looking for more out of their team this year than just that. The interesting thing is when you talk about going around the NFL and we're looking at quarterbacks and teams potentially lining up for draft picks and so forth. Davis Mills looked okay, 23 of 37, 240 yards and a couple touchdowns. That's not going to be a stat line that's going to force your team to look elsewhere.
No, I thought he looked competent. Did he look fantastic? No, his team would have won if he was fantastic, but he looked competent. And this is a team with a lot of holes on that roster. And if they're if they're picking 6th or 7th in the draft, they don't need a quarterback. At least at this point, it doesn't appear, but they need a lot of other things.
What's really interesting?
Them not going that way. Yeah.
What's just fascinating to me is not only is this a great quarterback class, but it's a good defensive end class. It's a good tackle class. There's going to be a lot of players available in that top 10 besides quarterbacks. They're going to be attractive to some of these teams. And if these teams early in this process, teams that you think are quarterback minded heading into this season and end up getting halfway decent play from their quarterbacks, that does position Seattle well, depending on what they want to do. Now, obviously, Geno had a great outing in this outing. Not going to take anything away from that. But the long-term idea is that Geno's getting older. They want to have a quarterback solution long-term. That's the way that you build franchises. And so I do believe that Seattle would, if they end up losing and only winning, 5-6 games, they're going to have a top 10 pick and consequentially have a real nice opportunity to get a great player out of the draft. So we'll
Yeah,
see.
and there are some good quarterbacks in this draft. This isn't like last year. Because last year
No,
going
it's
into
not.
the season, Spencer Rattler was thought of as the top quarterback in the class, and he got benched. Like that's how good he was. And now he's with a different team and not playing great football. There just wasn't a quarterback last year. But Marcus Stroud and the kid from Alabama and the kid from Kentucky and
Bryce Young and Levis and
yeah,
Jackson from Florida. Yeah, it just there's a list of 5 or 6 players that are probably going to be first round picks, and 3 or 4 of them are going to be top 10 picks.
So
And yeah,
if you're Seattle and you're thinking, okay, if we can get if we end up in the 7th pick or the 8th pick, normally that's too low to get a quarterback, and you're thinking about trading up, or maybe you could do what the Bears did a couple years ago and just wait and know that one of them is going to be there for you because there's so many in the draft.
yeah. And with two first round picks and 2 seconds, if you waited, you're still having a tremendous amount of draft capital to do everything else you want to do in this draft as well. So
Absolutely.
it'll be something that we'll watch. I mean, we're going to come back in this show. We're going to talk about the quarterbacks in college football as play progresses, as the weeks roll along. We'll just kind of keep track of that. And we'll keep track, obviously, of what we're doing as well. But it's just an interesting side note that we'll be looking at. So anything else before we head out of this midweek show, Keith?
I think we should just head out of this midweek show. We've got the preview coming up tomorrow, where we preview the 49ers. I've got a lot to say about the 49ers and what's going on there. I'm sure you do too, and it'll be a fun show tomorrow.
All right. Find Keith on Twitter at MyersNFL. You can find me at NW Seahawk. You can find the show and find us on your favorite podcast platforms and YouTube. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and share it if you like it. So until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.